Welcome in, more lights, to another round of the conversations. We've got a repeat guest today. It is Aussie Peter SMISSEN.
Pete repeat.
Welcome, Pete, once again. I was saying, I completely forgot about this one, man. Like I had it's just one of those ones where you talk about it like a month prior, and you're like, yeah. Obviously, didn't put it in the calendar, and then glad you messaged me. So it's definitely going to be more on the like light side of the conversations, not my normal in-depth tons of research.
What would you have researched for today's episode though, anyway?
See, like the way I do it is this is why I really love podcasting. It's because I essentially, for my job, just get to listen to podcasts. So for example, I just had Adam Curry on recently, the Podfather, who's basically the guy who invented podcasting, and he's done all sorts of other crazy and cool shit. And so I just got to listen to, I probably would have listened to 20 to 30 hours in the 2 weeks prior of just random podcasts, in having him on and whatnot. So I can sort of get a feel for the type of questions he always gets asked, the stories that he always gives. So I can sort of try and move away from that, or at least point him in different areas. And then I'd also listen to his own pod, but he's got 4 or 5 different ones over the years. So just multiple hours of listening, and then the fun internet sleuthing as well, going on their Facebook pages and LinkedIn and all that sort of stuff. So that's how I do my research, man.
It's hard though, isn't it, working out how much to dive in to that, how much to actually try and dig up on your guest, and also how much to avoid the standard kind of questions, because so often they're the most interesting ones, and that's the whole reason that they end up on podcasts. So I've experienced the same thing with like interviews, and being like I've got someone tonight that I want to interview about I think I was reading the study earlier. Effectively what she found was that native speakers perceive foreign accents as less trustworthy and believe them less frequently if they haven't already had experience with that foreign accent. So I wanted to talk to her about that. And I'm like, how many of her studies should I be reading? How deep do I go? How much time do I really have to actually spend digging up dirt, or, trying to find really unique ways of pushing the interview versus just sort of towing the main line and covering that one single paper and everything. So it is always this kind of interesting push and pull that you have to work out, right?
Yeah. How much would you say you on average would do that for? Because I mean, you
definitely not 20 to 30 hours.
Yeah.
That's quite a commitment. I mean, I guess if it was someone like, I think you were saying, was it Adam Curry? Is that who it was? Yeah. If you're saying someone really, really big and famous, then obviously I'm going to probably put in a lot more effort and time, because one, I don't want to look like an idiot. And also I want to, do them justice and present as good an interview as possible. But if it's someone that I've, only just recently heard of, and the idea that I have is a very specific one, I haven't had all these things going on in my mind about this person for a long time, with all these different things that I would love to, harass them about and ask them about in the interview, then I'll typically spend a little less time and probably add in my own sort of interesting questions that I'm personally interested in. I don't know if I guess you get to sort of do that with your interviews too, but I quite often just like to wing it, more Joe Rogan style, that sort of less formulaic. I'll ask a single question and you have a few minutes to respond to it without any kind of input or interruption from me. I kind of find those a little boring. I mean, but there's obviously a fine line there too, with how often you should be interrupting your guest or adding your own opinion or changing the direction of the interview. So it's something that I'm always trying to improve at, and I'm by no means perfect at it, but I find those interviews kind of more interesting, where you get to you have sort of an outline of what you want to cover, and you kind of do it in your own words without being like, here's my piece of paper, hold on. So what did you do, like in this study? I prefer to kind of wing it. And then when something comes up that's interesting, be like, ooh, okay, so wait, stop for a sec. What do you mean by that? Or how does this affect so-and-so? So one of the things that I would really like to chat to this woman about is native speakers listening to the accents of other native speakers, and whether or not we're biased against them and have trouble, say, with Glaswegian. the Glasgow accent from Scotland. That seems to be one of those stereotypical ones where very few people have a lot of exposure to it, and so find it very difficult to understand. And so even though it's not a foreign accent, really, like it's not another language, it has all the hallmarks of effectively being a foreign accent to the average person in terms of different pronunciation of different consonants and vowel sounds, and being difficult to process when you hear it for the first time or when you don't have experience. So it'd be interesting to know if she were to do this study on native English accents with people who had no or little experience with them, would she find the same result as she did in the study where she used, I think it was a Polish accent, and tested people's trustworthiness rating for statements that the Polish people read out to them versus British people who read them out to other British people.
Yeah. So did she do this over like tons of different people, or was it just based in Australia, or well, I'm not even.
This is Britain, so she's based in Britain, in London. I didn't remember going through the methods too deeply, so I'm not sure how big her sample size was, but I think it was like multiple Polish speakers and multiple British speakers reading out the sentences that people were going to listen to, and then obviously having probably tens of people at least that she was getting the results from. And so when they heard the Polish accent overall, the scores that were given in terms of trust, I think truth or false, right? Or lying versus telling the truth, it leaned much further to the lying side of things, or the untrustworthy false information side of things, than it did to the truth and trustworthy side of things, despite obviously it being the same series of phrases read out just by people with different accents. And I mean, it's just it seems like it's just another example of in-group, out-group preference and discrimination, where it's obvious it makes sense evolutionarily to discriminate against the out-group, people who aren't in your in-group, because evolutionarily speaking, they're probably much more of a danger to you, whether it's disease, whether it's war or fighting, whether it's them competing for your resources. And so as humans, we're just programmed to be skeptical of, at the sort of good end of things of the out group, and, murderous at the bad end of things. You go to Papua New Guinea, and they have some of the highest rates of, I think, intergroup violence. So Papua New Guinea has these huge mountain systems that are like 3 or 4 kilometers high. It's where the Australian plate is kind of smashing into the Asian plate. And so they have these huge mountains there. And as a result, the rainforest there and the mountains combined to have created over thousands of years, really, really kind of isolated groups of people who speak completely different languages. I think they have more languages in Papua New Guinea than all of Australia did with all the indigenous groups here, probably because of the topology of the regions and the fact that people are so much more easily isolated than in Australia, where the indigenous groups could sort of move around more freely. And so as a result, they end up in just violent conflicts a lot more frequently, and they would just go and massacre one another historically, because they were dangerous to one another, whether it was disease or whether it was competing for limited resources, and so I think, it's interesting that we're sort of primed like that to be very, very, I guess it's kind of like shoot first, ask questions later.
Yeah, for sure.
But like on a really big level where, and there's, even if you're wrong, there's no real downside to you evolutionarily, like passing on your genes. If you kill a group or a person in another group that's outside your group, it sort of has no effect on you, even if they were innocent and didn't mean any harm to you, because your group's still going to survive. Whereas if you do it, it's that it's the false negative, false positive thing, like the tiger in the grass. If you think you hear a tiger, but there's no tiger there, it's that false negative, but it's not a problem. But the problem is where you don't think you hear one and there is a tiger, and the tiger kills you, right?
Yeah.
So
this is one of my favorite, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it ties in super nicely, because with what I was just thinking. I always hate that analogy, and my problem with it is I've never actually seen I've never seen anything prove to me that is particularly true, because I could equally...
Which one? The tiger one?
Yeah, because I could equally, in my mind, come up with one where it's, I'm out with my group, and I've got my little tribe, a couple of people with me, and we're going to hunt whatever it is. and then I am really skittery, and I always hear or see a tiger, and I'm always jumping and scaring away the animals and stuff. And I was thinking, I could imagine that happening just as much. And then also my friends being like, get the fuck out of here. Like you're scaring away all the stuff. You go off on your own, and then you get kicked out. And so evolutionary speaking, maybe that's a bad thing to be too seeing stuff in the wild as well. So
there's a balance, right? There would be a balance, you know. If it goes too far to the opposite
one of that, I'm always bringing that one in. So that's my contribution.
Oh man, well, I'm sure in those sorts of environments, if you were too dangerous or did stuff that was sort of deleterious to the group, you would just be knocked off or ostracized, you know, whether or not it was fair. But if you were impacting the group as a result of that, you know, scaring away food or making it more dangerous or harder for them to survive, I'm sure that just like the out group, you would be, you know, they'd walk up behind you with a rock and just be like, yeah, this is over.
Yeah.
This job is getting too hard.
And like that ties in with what I wanted to ask you about, I guess, science and studies, because you've done, you got a PhD, right? In what was
evolutionary biology.
Yeah, biology. And so I guess one of the things that I always struggle with is, you know, you see these one-off studies, you know, apparently from what you were saying that people who have foreign accents in your sort of native hometown can be viewed as untrustworthy and whatnot. But you see like all of these different ones, and you've heard of the replication crisis, I imagine, of the, you know, not so many studies being able to come out, particularly in the it was in the social sciences, right? And just being unable.
Which one was that? There was a whole bunch of those. I think the one that set it off was that one about people being able to guess what was on cards that were held up to the tester. Like the tester would hold up cards, and the person would use kind of like psychic abilities to be able to say, oh yeah, it's an image of a cat or something.
Yeah.
And that study was done, and then later on shown that the guy had totally just cherry picked his data to the point of finding a positive result, and it was just unreplicable. So it was just like, yeah, this is bullshit. So there was a whole bunch of those in the social science side realm, I guess, that had that happen.
And there's more. You would have heard of the Stanley Milgram shock experiments and the Stanford.
Was that with the people in the room that start screaming and pretending to be electrocuted or whatever?
And it's like, oh, look at humans. They're, you know, so manipulable. If they've got a person of authority next to them, they'll kill people. Then there's the other ones, the Stanford prison experiments, which was. If you get a group of undergraduates, split them into prisoners and prisoners, and then the jailers, then you will have like almost instantly they'll become barbaric and start beating, abusing their power.
This is the crazy thing, right? I think those things are overstepped. I guess how would you say, like
you look at
there's all this other research, right? With I think it was World War I when the American soldiers went in and they found, I think it was like some ridiculous amount, like 80 or 90% were shooting above the heads of the enemy.
Yeah.
Because they subconsciously didn't want to kill them. So I think that's the interesting thing about human beings, is that although we think we're an incredibly violent species, when compared with other non-human apes like gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos and everything, I think we're actually a lot less violent proportionately. So it is really interesting that there's that sort of misconception, thinking that humans are, you know, horrible pieces of shit constantly trying to get one up over the other one. But at the same time, that there is some level of violence and there is in-group, out-group preference. Whether or not that ever manifests itself, you know, in mass murder or things like that every single time is another story. But I think today in the modern world, it's more like just, you know, these people look different from me, so I'm just going to keep away from them, or they have a different accent, so I'm sort of going to be less trustworthy. But it's not going to necessarily be like, wow, this person's black, I'm going to kill them because they're an out group, you know.
There's so like one of the reasons I bring these up, because I was reading a book called Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman, and he's sort of looking at the 2 points of, you know, Rousseau, the philosophy of Rousseau, which is more humans are good in nature, and that it's the like machine, it's the political system, it's the governments that corrupt us and make us do bad things. And then there's Thomas Hobbes more point of view, which is where cruel by nature, what is it, blood, tooth, and claw, and it's the systems we create which keep us in check. It's the law and justice and whatnot. And he sort of plays the two off in the book. I was going to ask though, one thing from reading that was me just going, man, I have been influenced a lot by one-off studies. So one-off studies that I've heard of, those ones, I'm sure I would have repeated those bunches of times in my life, saying, just to prove a point, someone brings up something and I'm like, oh yeah, you've heard of this, and then add that on. How do you think about those one-off studies, and what can you do to, I guess, pass out more, not the truth, but more what is more true, what is more likely to be true, with regards to any sort of studies or science that you particularly consume?
I guess it becomes more about things being gray than black and white. Just because one study comes out doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100%.
Flip the table.
Exactly. This is it. There's this one study that, found that climate change isn't affecting, bees in North America. So climate change doesn't exist. It's complete bullshit. So I think it's just getting good at science literacy and encouraging people to be, teaching people and encourage them to understand what that means in the broader scheme of things. When you do have a single study that finds a certain result, or maybe even the complete opposite result, it's not necessarily that you can then draw a conclusion one way or the other about a much broader concept or theory or issue. That you just have to get good at understanding, when there's like a single study like that, okay, this is evidence for the thing that they were looking at or that they were testing, that they found positive for their result, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% correct. It's just evidence for that. And so that needs to be challenged more and more and more. And as well, more and more studies need to be done to back that finding up independently. As you said, they need to be replicated in order to have more weight. But even then, it's not necessarily, you have to get good at understanding, or at least realizing that it's not, science isn't about finding out what's right. It's about getting rid of what's wrong so that we end up closer to what's right, whether or not what we actually have as an understanding or a model is 100% correct. It's just the most correct given the information that we currently have. Like the theory of evolution, right? Although it is effectively at this point, almost undoubtedly true, it's still like an explanation for the natural world and the phenomena that we see in front of us of there being many, many different species. But if tomorrow a whole bunch of research came out, independent studies were done that found there's nothing that's going to come out that's going to find that it's a completely false theory, but there may be things that come out that move it slightly or find, okay, the original idea of evolution is actually incorrect, or at least not 100% what we now understand it to be. And so it sort of gets good at shifting as opposed to just flipping the table, as you say, and it being like, oh, we just found evidence for God, so evolution, is complete BS because God created everything like that. But again, how you test that, I don't know. But
yeah, it's sort of like gravity getting refined. You had the Newton stuff, and then Einstein would come along and add special relativity and things like that. Yeah, for me,
think a big part of it, though, sorry to interrupt you, a big part of it is just science communication, the media, and realizing too the incentives that the media have. So they're always incentivized to show what's sexy and going to get eyes on newspapers or on websites or watching YouTube videos. And so they always take things to the extreme and say, new paper refutes theory of evolution or something, or disproves evolution. And so you just have to get better and better at filtering that kind of BS, or at least putting it into context and realizing, okay, there's a single paper. So that's one piece of evidence, but its weight is very, very, very small whilst there is only a single paper. And so more needs to be done. And if it starts building up and you get dozens or even hundreds or thousands of papers that then find in the same area, the same result and everything, it's like, okay, now I can sort of lean more confidently towards that as being, less wrong than what we currently had set up.
Yeah, I've started to use I mean, my methods are definitely for figuring out what's true and what's not true in the world are definitely not refined and super great. But I sort of liked when I was reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is about behavioral economics and how the system one and system two. System one is your sort of initial emotional reaction to it, and then you can sort of override that with some like lucky sort of thinking, hard hitting thinking. And when I say lucky, I mean you most of the time you're in system one just reacting to stuff, and you got a certain portion of the day where you can engage the logical part of your brain. And he had tons of studies in that book. And as I was going through, I was like, you could probably refute a lot of these, but all of them, it was the whole concept that he brought up, the whole idea, and then just attacking it from many different angles. So even if one study was a little bit dubious, I'd still say, okay, like his general thesis was pretty good. He's had enough sort of varied areas hitting it from that it probably is more true than not true.
Yeah. It's interesting, that sort of stuff. Like, I mean, a big issue that we have at the moment that's sort of a modern problem is like the anti-vaxxer movement, right? And that they still hold on to that single study done by, I can't remember his name, but on the vaccines causing autism, which again, I would imagine that wasn't the actual finding of the actual study. It would have been something like there is an association between people who have vaccines and people who have autism. It wouldn't have been a causal thing of like X causes Y. But that's been refuted so many times since coming out. And I think even the author, was either found out to be lying or fabricating his data, or he as well has just said that this is, it's incorrect. But it's interesting that people still hold this up and hold to it and believe it and prop it up, and are just not willing to listen to any kind of evidence against it. So we definitely do have this crisis where, one, people are incredibly scientifically illiterate and don't understand what science is or how it works, but then also that they're just so unaware of their own biases and the fact that they want to believe a certain thing and therefore only look for information that supports that, which is so unscientific, right? This is one of the things that we have to get weeded out of us, and is incredibly hard to do. Even the most, seasoned scientist, research scientist, often doesn't see his own biases when he's doing his, studies, his tests and everything, because quite often an idea that's come to him about, I'd like to see if this is true, I want to test to see if this is true, automatically he wants to find that it is, right? That you don't necessarily, it's very rare that you'll get an idea where you'll be like, it'd be really cool to find out if these two species are interbreeding, right? So for example, in my area of research, I was looking at how rodents in Australia had evolved over time, and there are a lot of species that sort of share similar environments. They're right next to one another, and one of these really cool things that happens often is hybridization, where they kind of overlap in a certain area, and because they're closely related species, they're actually interbreeding and sharing genes. And so if you were to come in there and be like, okay, I want to see the hypothesis here is, the null hypothesis would be these are two different species and they're not interbreeding at all. And the hypothesis would be that they are interbreeding, right? And so already when you start asking those questions, I don't think many people go in wanting to find the null hypothesis. They're like, all I want to do is prove these two species aren't interbreeding, because then you effectively have no story. It's not interesting. It's not sexy. Whereas if you can find that, these two species are actually interbreeding, but only in this little area, they're sharing genes there. Why are they doing that? It's so crazy that for some reason they kind of don't differentiate, but then at the extremes, they look like different things, or they're very different. They're very obviously different things. So you're already kind of programmed to be like, that's the result I want to find. So when I look at the data, I'm going to look a certain way because I'm constantly kind of skewing to wanting to find that result. So I may subconsciously edit parameters when I'm doing the statistics in order to kind of get the result that I want. And so this is a big problem with scientists, let alone the average person, in understanding this. But, so it is interesting that even those closest to doing this sort of work still suffer from those biases. And that was a constant battle, trying to be like, am I finding the result that I want to find because I am subconsciously changing things in order to get that result? Because then it's just not sexy to get up on stage and present your findings and be like, yeah, this is what I wanted to find, or at least this is what I was testing and I would have liked to have found, but I found nothing. You know, you're kind of like, well, and that's a broader issue with the whole scientific literature, peer review process and everything like that, and journals, because they only want to publish shit that is interesting, that people are going to find sexy. When you found that positive result, when you found that those two species are in fact doing this weird shit at the barrier where they both exist, the journals are incentivized to only want to publish interesting shit that's going to get more eyeballs on their papers and have their papers referenced by more scientists so that their prestige goes up. There's no incentive at all to publish negative results, right? Where you found no difference between, you know, for the hypothesis, the null hypothesis, what you found is the result. And so a lot of the time, probably the majority of the time, the null hypothesis is what is actually happening, right? There is no difference in whatever it is that you're looking at, but it's never published. No one ever says, you know, that two overlapping species aren't actually interbreeding, because it's kind of like no news. But that information is as important as finding that they are. But it just tends to, that's the issue with science today. I think a lot of those negative findings are never published, they're never looked at, then they're just sort of, the data's chucked out or it's kept on a hard drive somewhere and never looked at again.
Yeah. So like incentive wise, I can totally see why we're talking just before about how the media likes to hype things up. And I think the incentives there are, I think most people nowadays would sort of be like, the mass media realize, okay, there's biases going on here at the very least, and usually it's due to money. Is the main one, do you think, in science just individual people looking for prestige and fame?
No, it'll be, there's many levels, and again, I haven't really thought about it too much, but it was part of the reason I kind of left. I just got over the whole. I was going to say, like, I'm glad you're here because you can sort of talk shit about it. Yeah, well,
you're not on the inside.
Again, I bailed at after PhD, so I never really had like a job working for a museum or a university or an organization where I was paid to do research. Well, I was paid to do research during my PhD and masters, but in terms of scholarships and everything. There's many different incentives. The universities want to have the best researchers who get the best publications published in the highest prestige journals, right? And then you have the researchers that are working at the university are incentivized to publish a certain amount of papers per year. I think they often have to, you know, it's required, or at least like if it's not stipulated, it's kind of like, well, if you don't get X amount, I think it's about one a month, which is fucking insane in terms of the amount of work that goes into publishing a paper. And I'm like, for my entire PhD, which was 6 years, I had one published at the end of it, right? So I can't imagine trying to pump out a paper every single month, although, you know, seasoned researchers do get very efficient and good at doing what they're doing, and they have a team below them, but still it's a shitload of work. And some of them are outperforming that, but their incentive is to publish as much as possible and to get it into as sexier journals as possible. So again, you already have this incentive set up where they need to find positive results all the time and sexy results, things that are going to get into journals like Science and Nature. They're the ultimate goals, right? Of finding some insane result that, you know, I don't know. What's a good example of something that got into Science? Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but that sort of thing, like, you know, polar bears and grizzly bears are the same species, except they're morphologically different because of the ice or something like that. You know, that's the kind of thing that people always are trying to get, because it means that they'll be able to get a job in more places. They'll get paid more. They'll get promoted. They'll get other jobs. They'll be able to get a bigger team. They'll probably be more likely to win grants in order to be able to keep doing their research because they've been published in certain things. So the people who are giving away the grant money know that the work is more likely to be published in certain journals. So it is this very difficult thing where money, as well as the prestige and power kind of, I think that's secondary to it. I think it would primarily be money. It's not necessarily someone holding onto a bag of coins and, you know, greedily laughing.
Scrooge McDuck style.
Yeah, but it's more about universities are trying to get as much as they can for the money they put into things. And people obviously want to get jobs so that they can support their family and make as much money as they can. They also want to have enough money to be able to grow their their prestige and their power, right? To build their lab out, to have enough other researchers below them. And so the more grants they get, the more research they can do, the more scholarships they can give, or the more people they can hire. And so it is skewed that way. I think the ideal system would be that journals publish everything. You're being hired not based on your publication record, nor which journals you got into. So you would have to remove all those kinds of incentives to really, I think, purify the scientific method, just science, I guess, broadly speaking, and the results that we get. Because there are all these incentives in there at the moment to be trying to find unique stuff all the time. And I think as a result, you end up with these single random papers that can't be replicated, because people have manipulated the data in order to get a certain result, whether consciously or subconsciously, and as a result, it can't be replicated, right? You can't, if you try and repeat the study they've done, you're not going to find the same result, because you haven't done exactly what they've done subconsciously or consciously to get the data they did. So it is kind of a mind fuck, but it's like the best system we have for science, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the other issue is peer review. And so you end up, the only way for you to be published in a journal is for, I think, at least 2 or 3 other scientists. I think it's at least 2, but it's anytime I published anything, it was 3 scientists, and they're meant to be independent, but they can never truly be independent in terms of them having no connections with you whatsoever, because they're usually going to have to be in your field of research to be able to critically go through the science that you've done, right? Like as a biologist, I could never have sat down and looked at something that was, astrophysics, because I just have absolutely no understanding of the methods they've used, the statistical analyses they've done, the prior research in that area. And then, so you end up with effectively people that almost everyone that knows everyone, especially if you're a big name in research. And then as a result, you're either going to end up with these people trying to help you get published or trying to hamper you getting published, because you have some sort of a disagreement with this person. You guys are on different ends of, this tiny area of science and understanding how something happens. And so you have this conflict, and one of you is like, well, this guy's a total moron. Everything here is wrong because he doesn't believe in this theory, whereas, I believe in that theory. So it is interesting, the whole peer review thing. It's like a gatekeeping thing where only the elites get to really decide what science actually gets through and what gets published. And even when I was doing it, so often you would have to make all these edits and changes to your work, and you would do it even if you didn't believe in it, because you would just like, fuck it, just get it published. So this guy disagrees with me, I'm just going to change it so that he'll say, yeah, it can go through now, and then it gets published in the journal. So it is interesting how it's nowhere near as pure as it should be in terms of the findings that come out of research, full stop. There are all these things in there that are kind of pulling and pushing the results that actually end up getting published in certain journals in certain directions, whether it's, being conservative or whether it's pushing to that sexy kind of end.
Yeah, I've only had one taste of that, which was when I was a tutor, and I was reviewing some assignments for a class that I was tutoring. It was just one, and this was a couple of years after I'd left the university, had worked in the mines, come back, and was just doing it for fun, to be honest. And I reviewed them like as what I thought they should have been, and it was usually a spectrum from like, I was giving some people like 40% because I feel like they obviously didn't listen to me in the class when I was just like, presentation is like critical here. You need to do this thing. Like, I'll show you. Like, I was, taking them through it all on the programs and whatnot. But some people, some people. And then all the way up to people who just absolutely nailed it and was like, man, this is awesome. And so I probably failed. I'd say like, I don't know, 5% of the people who submitted stuff. And the professor was like, no, we can't do that. We need to like bell curve them up. So basically everyone passes. And I was like, well,
this happens at universities today so often, right? Because a lot of the time we have full fee paying students and the universities need that income. And if they fail a bunch of people, then people are going to either obviously drop out and no longer pay fees, or they're going to hear later on too how hard it is to go through. But the problem is that you have the other end of it where, as a result of people never failing, the quality or perceived quality of the degree is diminished greatly because it's so easy to get as long as you just show up. And so this was that one of these things that I started noticing at Melbourne University as I was going through there, that it became easier and easier to do the course that you'd previously done that was difficult when you did it. I think, and again, this is just personal experience. This isn't necessarily true or false, but it was my sort of view of things where you were just like, what do you mean no one fails anymore? Like, surely that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, well, I'd put the same thing on it. I had never graded assignments before. Maybe this is how you do it. And I was just had like the wrong impression in my head. But and same sort of thing. Was that one of the reasons why you didn't really get into the field of and like actually studying and whatnot?
In doing academic research?
Yeah.
It was mainly just that it was so cutthroat. People were just backstabbers and bitches, and everyone had an ego. And I mean, this is all the negative side of it. There were plenty of lovely people who do it and have big hearts and are kind and, do their best. But I just got over the whole, there were just way too many rotten apples in such a small barrel that I was just like, yeah, fuck this. Like, why would I put myself through the stress of getting, this low paying job, and just for the pure love of science, keep doing this in order to, learn more about rats or whatever it is. I was just like, this is just so not fulfilling at all. I get zero fulfillment, at least outside of doing the work itself. I didn't feel like I was making a difference. I didn't feel like I was changing anything. It was just pure. It was almost like it was just me masturbating, right? Where it's just like, I'm the only one that has something to show for it because I enjoy the results of studying this one little group of animals. And so it's sort of like, what is this doing for the world, right? If I go to the bathroom and masturbate, no one gets anything out of it except me. And it's a momentary thing, So it's sort of like, why am I doing this? There's no one there sending me emails saying, Pete, it's so great that you did that. Whereas with Aussie English, the podcast that I have and the online education sort of platform that I have for people learning Australian English, I found it just so much more fulfilling because I was helping people. I was getting so many comments and emails and so much feedback just saying, thank you, your work's making a difference. It's helping me. I got a job. I feel more confident. I've met a partner in Australia and I'm communicating with them really well now and all that sort of stuff, on a daily basis. Whereas with science, it would almost be zero. Like even from my supervisors, you would do something, you would try your ass off, you would do so much work and they would be like, yeah, it's not good enough. That's shit. And again, it probably is just them. Like it's not necessarily all supervisors were like this, but that shaped who I became and what I thought of the system, and the people that I was surrounded with were very sort of, it was never good enough. And so I was just like, why would I bother doing this? This is just so, self-congratulatory, and I don't know. I got a bit over it, and just seeing how much people were always trying to one-up each other or feel better than everyone else and be like, this guy thinks he's good because he found this. So I got this study in this paper in this journal, and I was just like, tap out. I'm sure that you have that almost everywhere, though, in almost every area of work where you have a big group of people that are all kind of competing against each other despite also working with one another. The good thing about, say, Aussie English is that I'm the boss and there's there's no one above me who gets to tell me I'm doing a shit job or a good job. It's just the voice in my head that gets to tell me stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, yeah, you didn't trade. I mean, you traded the stress of the standard work job and standard work life, I guess, for like the stress of Aussie English, which is maybe not even lesser. It's just a different type of one as well.
Oh, for sure. It's completely different. I don't get to really turn. Although researchers don't either. They're kind of always thinking about it. The amount of hours they put in that are probably unpaid because they go home, they're still reading papers, they're still, honing their craft, they're interested, they're engaged. Like my supervisors from the museum and university when I was there were just, that was all they did. And I was always just like, get a fucking life, man. Like go play with your kids. Jesus Christ. And there are so many stories of these researchers, especially the big ones, that just effectively neglect their families because they're just my work is so important and I can't ever turn off, and it's always 100% all the time. And Aussie English, I could go down that road, but I'm just too lazy to do that. And I like my family too much. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what was the thing that kind of put the nail in the coffin for me was at the end of my PhD. I remember telling my supervisor that I wanted to keep going with Aussie English because it was starting to earn a bit of money. And I just found it so much more fulfilling. And he kind of just laughed in my face, and was just like, but it's meaningless. You're not doing any science. And I was just like, that's why I want to do it, mate. Like, yeah, I don't think you understand. And it's funny because within 3 years, I was earning more than he and his wife combined. So I was just like, like I'm the moron, and helping thousands of people. So I was just like, I don't understand. Would you only respect me if I was still stuck in a lab by myself doing all this work and then publishing a paper every now and then? That's success in your eyes. So
yeah. Well, it's your experience there resonates one where I was just trying out some, like I said, I was doing some tutoring. I was just doing lots of mini things before I actually went and started traveling through Latin America. And I was starting to do some extras work and like promotional work for just random companies and for random like little ads and film things. So you can catch my back in one of the Yui ads from like 3 years ago or something. And
I'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. Big shot over here. And I found that just interacting with those sorts of people, there was like, it's just this weird vibe of everyone's really good at essentially lying because they're really good actors. Like but
this is Hollywood too, right? I mean, that's the extreme end of it. I don't get like, sorry to interrupt you again. There are so many of these actors that you think are really good people, and then the vibe you get from them, and then you kind of realize it's all kind of fabricated for the public, and also you see you're still in this environment that is quote unquote incredibly toxic to women, right? Like, I mean, the whole Me Too movement came out, and you're like, how are you guys still interested in being involved with this thing, right? It's like when the Catholics came out, we found out, like in France recently, there was something done saying that there was thousands of pedophile priests there. And you're like, how are there any Catholics left in France? Like, what would it actually take? You molesting and raping children, you're on an organizational level, and moving them around, and that's still not enough for you to be like, I'm out. I'm going to be Muslim. Fuck this, or even a different denomination. And it's the same thing with Hollywood. A lot of the time, you just like, I guess they love doing what they're doing, but they also have all these other incentives set up with like, it's the cash cow. I'm making so much money. There's a huge actor that I thought was a really good guy. He's Australian. He may or may not be in the Marvel movies, and he does all this stuff with fitness companies. Like, he has he's the face of a fitness company now that's probably making millions of dollars from the app and everything, but he's on steroids. He is almost certainly taking a lot of steroids in order to maintain the physique that he has, right? And so, especially to be in one of those superhero films, almost everyone that is in those is almost certainly on steroids. And yet it's this huge thing that's never spoken about publicly. I've heard of certain actors saying that they have to sign these non-disclosure agreements when they do these films because Hollywood effectively forces them to either get on the steroids if they want that part, because this is our expectation, right, of these people in superhero films. Yeah, and the issue that I have isn't that they're on steroids. I ultimately don't give a shit about what you do or don't do with your body. That's totally up to you. The issue is the messaging they send children as a result of this, and by constantly saying it's just hard work, eat your chicken and rice, hit the gym, you'll get there just like me. I had someone the other day saying, look at The Rock, look at that hard work. And you're like, there's hard work, but the guy's 50, dude, and he's bigger than he's ever been. Do you think that's possible now? Have you seen him when he was 20, when he was 30, and the size that he was then, and he's bigger now? You're like, and he's 50. And you think he's 100% natural. Again, he's got like, I think I worked it out, 2% of the world's population is following him on Instagram. Oh my God. How many of those people are children? And how many of those people that are children think I just put in the hard work, all I need to do. And then as a result of going to the gym, not getting the results that they want, what do? They turn to drugs, or they get depressed, or they turn to steroids. I mean, so yeah, there's so many issues with Hollywood. That's a massive problem that always blows my mind, that certain actors are still, people like, even like Hugh Jackman, I think he seems like this incredibly beautiful human being. At least I have that view of him. But then on the other side, you're kind of like, you're involved with this system, and you're kind of like, how do I pass that? And you're also in certain films that would require, I would imagine, certain things. So and yet you would never talk about that openly. So yeah, it is a sort of a really weird deal with the devil, I feel, a lot of the time.
Yeah. That's the sort of feeling I got from those couple of people that I met, and it was enough for me to be like, yeah, this was fun. I was in a Yui commercial, but I don't really need like, that's as far as I'm going on the other.
Have you been watching the Alec Baldwin stuff?
No, he like accidentally shot someone in the face. Maybe not accidentally. I don't know.
In the chest, yeah. He killed Helena. I think she was a Ukrainian. What would you say, the executive producer of film, whatever. She was the one dealing with the cameras on the set and everything. Yeah, I watched his interview, and then I watched it broken down by I think a psychologist talking about lying.
Yeah,
and you're just like, oh my God, it's so true. Like the only point in the film, in the interview, when Alec Baldwin cries is when he's talking about himself and getting into certain films, certain roles with other actors and actresses that were really big, and you're like, holy shit, he's only crying because he's feeling sorry for himself. But when he talks about the woman that he killed and the fact that she had a 9-year-old child and everying, it's mind-boggling.
Gotcha. Yeah. One thing I just recommend with those ones is, once again, it needs to be the culmination of all the individual things rather than one particular thing. Another good book is What Everybody Is Saying, and body is capitalized, and it's I think Joe Navarro, who was an ex-FBI guy, and it's all about body language and being able to read people lying through body language when they're not telling the truth. And he was saying in it, he had a certain way of saying it, but it was basically like the grouping. It's not because a dude scratches his nose or is touching his face, that means he's uncomfortable. It's because he's doing that. He's shifting his feet. He's looking
everything
sideways.
Coupled together.
Yeah.
But they had that with Alec Baldwin. I love those things. There's a few of those channels on YouTube that break down interviews or talk about body language and lying.
Yeah, my brother's really into those.
They're amazing because you just do get to learn so much more about what you do as a human, or what we do, right, when we're trying to cover something up. And so, like, I think with Alec Baldwin, he was saying that, and it's not, he can never say that he is lying, but he was saying that, that this is pretty indicative of someone who's trying to cover something up. And it was that thing of like getting asked a certain question and refuting it lightly, but then trying to move the conversation on really quickly by throwing a lot of information at the interviewer all of a sudden, as well as doing those fidgety things of like, touching your face or moving or changing your legs. And it was interesting where he was breaking that down. A good one was the Prince Andrew interview that he did. Did you watch that one and the breakdown of that psychologically?
Honestly, man, like if it's pop culture, I'm pretty far out of it.
Well, the interesting thing with that I liked, at least, in terms of what the guy pointed out about Prince Andrew, was that when he was always emphatic about things that had nothing to do with the actual allegation of raping this 17-year-old girl. So when he was asked, did you have sex with her? He was like, no, I don't think so. No. And then when he was asked, it was said that you were seen with this girl on the Thursday, and he was like, no, I was having pizza. I was definitely having pizza. I can remember having pizza. There's no chance that happened. No chance. Like, he refuted it so heavily. And the guy was showing, he's like, that is true. Obviously he thinks, or at least that's what he's showing, like that's the kind of natural reaction you have when you refute something that is obviously wrong or incorrect. But when he gets asked about, did you have sex with this girl? He gives the most sort of meek, weird, tepid response. And it's like, that is the kind of thing, if you had not done it, you would definitely be like, absolutely not, emphatically no. There is zero chance that I didn't touch her, didn't meet her, didn't know her, never had sex with her. No, 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 no. And so it is so funny. You'll see this in the I love watching people who've been caught for a crime getting interviewed by police. There's a few awesome channels on YouTube, and their videos get millions of views, where they break down the interview between the person who's just been arrested for murder, but like the kinds of murders where they've like literally killed someone, buried them in the bush, and then, you know, disposed of their stuff, you know, not just like they killed someone randomly in the street after a fight. And the kinds of responses that people give to certain questions. And not only that, but seeing how the investigators are fucking geniuses in terms of how they ask questions and the kinds of information that they give the interviewee in order to sort of not necessarily prime them a certain way, but to break down the kind of acting responses that they would otherwise give, and to sort of put them under stress, right? A big one is putting them in the corner of a room away from the door where they can see it, but they can't get to it, that sort of thing, and sitting between them and the exit. And so I love those things, because you just learn so much more about how people behave, how people lie, and also how people tell the truth without even meaning to tell the truth. So that how they obviously get caught in a lie. So anyway, so rant over, but that sort of stuff fascinates me endlessly, the body language and everything, and trying to, it always makes me think, having watched this, would I be able to at all utilize any of this if I tried to lie after, you know, committing a crime, or would I just be, it would be zero in terms of its utility, you know?
I think you being able to use it would, no, you'd need to practice it. That's not the sort of, it's like that theoretical knowledge, like, oh yeah, I know how to pick up a girl, but via use these three simple tactics. But no, it's not until you're actually like out there on the street hitting on girls that you're going to be able to do it. I
just don't think I could fabricate that kind of emotional reaction to cover it up. So there was the guy, Chris, that killed his family in the US. He killed his 2 daughters and his wife, and then went back to the house and pretended like he'd just been away, and came back and was like, I don't know where they are, you know, and he's doing all these interviews on TV and not crying. And everyone was just like, that's a pretty weird reaction to have if your family just fucking disappeared, you know, and it's seen as dodgy. All their shit is still at home, but they're all gone. And that's one of those things I'm like, yeah, there is zero chance I would ever get away with that kind of thing, because I wouldn't be able to manifest that kind of natural response, having known that I, you know, did the wrong thing or whatever. I wouldn't be able to just turn on the waterworks in front of the cameras and be like, you know, yeah. I think my wife could do it though, so I better watch out. She could probably kill me and pretend that she didn't.
Stay on her good side, man.
I know.
No, you're better off suited doing to what you're doing, the reaction videos and stuff. I was watching
instead of murdering people.
Yeah. Murdering people and trying to get away with it. Just stick to the reaction videos.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of like, you were doing one, I think it was related to like dating in Australia and whatnot. But it just got me thinking. You're kind of out of the lockdowns now. What have you been up to, man? Have you been getting out? Have you been,
haven't been dating?
Not insinuating sexual wise, but just in general.
Well, that probably went up during the lockdown, to be honest. No, I mean, it's probably been months now since we've really been constricted. I can't remember when it ended. I think it ended probably in October, maybe early October. I think I got vaccinated for the second time in September. Actually, that may have been October. Yeah. But I don't know. Life's effectively back to normal, to be honest, except for having to wear a mask inside certain shops and everything. I think we're still getting like 1,000 cases a day, but if you walk outside, you wouldn't know, to be honest. I think we're a little bit worried now. Obviously, you guys probably are too, but about Omicron and how effective our vaccines are going to be against that. It seems like, in particular, I had AstraZeneca twice, and that seems to show little effect at, defending you against the Omicron sort of full effects. So I'm looking forward to getting my booster. I'll probably get Moderna or Pfizer or something like that. Mix it up, mix and match. Get some diversity in me. But yeah, back to normal, really. We went on a little trip. We went to Apollo Bay. I think that got cancelled, and then we had to do it again because of the lockdown crap. Went down to Apollo Bay, which was really good, down the Great Ocean Road. And then last weekend went to my grandparents' farm near Bendigo. So it's been good to at least be able to travel. That was the main thing I think that killed us during lockdowns, was that inability to see loved ones most of the time, because you were more than 5Ks away from them, and so you couldn't travel to go and see them. But then also just having the freedom to be like, fuck it, I'm driving to, you know, the beach, which is 30 minutes away, or I want to go on a trip for the weekend that's, you know, to a location that's 2 hours away. So it is really interesting how it'll be so interesting to know the stats on suicide, on depression, on mental health throughout the lockdowns, if there was any way that could actually be traced or tracked, and then to work out whether or not it outweighs the good that the lockdowns did.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a tough question that I think a lot of people don't want answered. I think that's one.
Well, Dictator Dan, our premier here, got so much shit for all the lockdowns, but by and large, we've had it pretty good. And it blew my mind. Did you see the stuff that was coming out of America about Australia being a failed state and all this bullshit because of the lockdowns? They got this. I think Tucker Carlson was talking about it. Joe Rogan was talking. This is what happens when you have a population that are de-armed. They don't have guns. The state will just do whatever they want. And I'm like, mate, I remember doing the maths and working out that proportionately Australia has I think it was 39.2 times fewer deaths from COVID based on population size. So if we were America and say we've had, I don't know, 10,000 deaths, we haven't, it's been much less than that, but say it was 10,000. If we were the size of America, it'd be 390,000 deaths that we would have had. So it just blows my mind when we had that sort of rhetoric come out, because America is such a weird country where you kind of like, it's so Western, but it's almost, it's so extreme in terms of their liberal freedom, individualism, that it just blows my mind at times, because it's almost like they're frozen in that state and they can't. I have this kind of, I think Jordan Peterson was the one who opened my eyes to this, but he was saying, you know, that for a government and for a political system to work really well, it has to be able to go between that liberalism and conservatism, right? You need to be able to move depending on what's happening. And so if you do have something like a pandemic, you need to kind of go to the conservative side of things and sort of have these lockdowns and control people a lot more and have all these rules in place, because you need structure and order in order to deal with something that's effectively bringing chaos into the system, especially when it's leading to, you know, it could potentially lead to thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people in Australia's deaths. But then once it's gone, you need to be able to go back to the other side of respecting people's freedoms and enhancing that as much as possible, right? Within reason, maybe not giving them nuclear weapons to take home, but within reason. And so it's really interesting to see that the US is so, at least a large proportion of the US, not every single person, but a large proportion seem to be so close to that liberal freedoms all times. There's no... You should always be worried about the individual, not the population on a sort of holistic scale ever, right? And it just blows my mind that you'll have people like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson that just don't seem to understand that you need to be able to move between the two, that you need to be like, it's that Bruce Lee thing. You need to be like water to be able to fill the cup or crash like a wave, depending on what you're faced with. And if you can't do that, then you're kind of going to fail, right?
Yeah, I jump between the two. I like so many things, and like in particular, so many individual Americans, but then I'll hear stuff like, I was just finishing off the Last Dance. Yes, that's how far behind I am in media and pop culture. And it's like, they just won the world, the World Series of basketball or World Series of baseball. I'm like, the world? Come on, people. Mm-hmm. Who's competing in America? You didn't even get people like Japan and other people to have a chance. And then, we're the most free country in the world. And it's like, you have the most people per capita locked up in prisons. Like that's
it does. I never know where they pull that shit from, right? They say that, but it's like, if you look at any of the metrics, like if I were to look up that, what are we doing here? Like list of freest countries, I'm pretty sure that America isn't even in the top 10 or so, right? Like it's literally New Zealand, Switzerland, at least Hong Kong, whenever this was done, Denmark, Australia, Canada, Ireland, Estonia, Germany, Sweden. And then if you were to go all the way down, if I do a search for United States, what are they ranked at? They're
there's only a couple countries which lock up, like physically lock up more.
They're in the
people.
20s. Yeah, it's insane, isn't it?
I mean, depends how what they're measuring by free there as well. But then there's like all the other stuff that I love. Like I love the individualism that they have, the crazy, so many different things going on there. That's I've never actually been there myself. So that's just putting a little pointer there on that. But yeah, it's I have very mixed feelings.
I know. Well, I think all of us do, right? I would love to live in America, but for the fact that, the gun culture and the medical treatment sort of culture frightens the shit out of me.
That one's a scary one.
For sure. I can't imagine having that hanging over my head, getting a job and having to keep that job in order to have, say, medical, like Medicare effectively for my family, like medical insurance for my family, not just me. And so you kind of like, how many people are working jobs they hate because they're horrified or terrified of the idea of trying to get a new job because they lose, if their wife has a heart attack or something, suddenly you got to pay $100,000 out of pocket to have her, treated by a heart surgeon or something. It's like that. That just boggles the mind, and
yeah, crazy stuff. I was going to actually ask as well about cryptos. Have you looked at them into much, man? Because we have very similar temperaments, and I've been fascinated with them recently. And yeah, have you ever?
I was a little bit originally, but it seems like it's such a deep rabbit hole. Like if you're going to get into it, you need to go hard. Yeah. And I keep seeing so many of the things, like the volatility of Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies kind of freaks me out. All of the cash grab ones that kind of like launch and then go from a cent a share to $1. Yeah. And then the people who own it just take the money and run. Seems like it's happened so many times now where people can set it up and make $60 million in a matter of months just by doing that and ripping off people of their life savings. So, I mean, these are the bad sides of it, but I don't know enough about the good sides. And it does freak me out that it's kind of like, it's intangible. It's not tied to anything that's sort of physical apart from, maybe digital data.
Yeah. So, yeah. There's, speaking of biases, one of the things I've been trying to combat a bit recently is my dad's definitely on the anti-crypto side, and so we've been having some discussions, and it's really sort of like refreshing to see my own one as well, which is very pro crypto and very and the reason I am is because I'm actually being able to start to use it, which is fun. Like I'm starting to see some actual use cases in my real life. The podcasting stuff, I think I talked to you about,
as in like paying for things.
Yeah. And just being able to move money around. I remember before traveling, I looked up, like maybe I'll be able to use a cryptocurrency or something to avoid the international fees, to be able to exchange, like this was back in 2018, not a chance of that happening. Or maybe there was
back then or now?
No, back then it was very, very difficult. Now, maybe you'd be able to. I know there's some more ATMs. I know there's definitely some places, and I'm honestly just better versed in it. So I'd be able to find out places where I would be able to use like an escrow service where I put some in, they'll give me Argentinian pesos or whatnot. But yeah, I remember I tried to buy a shirt from another podcasting collective. There's two guys called the Family Podcast in the UK, and I just wanted to buy a shirt from them. They were doing like some merch stuff, so I was like, all right, yeah, I'll send them $25. Man, sending him $25 through the Swift, through that stuff, I basically had to get his life story of, where he lives, where the bank is, where the address. It was so insane. I was like, man, if you had a crypto,
can I just give you crypto? Yeah.
I could, and honestly, that was just where I was like, man, this would be so much easier. So, I would have saved 3 hours of collective time just by being able to do that super easy. So
what happens though when you have something?
Yeah.
What happens though when you have something that is so volatile like that and you want to pay for something? So you have a certain amount of money you've put into crypto, and then the next day it's not worth anywhere near as much, but you wanted to pay for, say, a car, and you put your $100,000 in there and it's crashed and now it's worth 40,000. Is there any kind of way to mitigate that, or it's just sort of part and parcel of
So they have some things called stable coins there, which are basically, they use a mechanism to keep the price of that consistent. So it's like sort of pegged to the US dollar. I haven't looked into them too much, and it's honestly, it is, I wouldn't recommend people to be trying to use it as cash. Like, I'm not using it as cash now. I can't particularly go to a bar and use it.
I got my Bitcoin card.
Yeah.
Oh, out of funds, buddy.
Yeah. So it's definitely not there yet, but I just see it sort of coming. Sort of, to me, it feels like I wasn't there particularly when the internet was really kicking off. I was too young, but it sort of sounds like that same feeling that people had, where it's, no, you can't use pets.com to acquire stuff. Like, you can't use amazon.com to buy this particular shade of lipstick yet, but in 10 years time you're going to be able to do that. So it's sort of, I'm having a lot of fun just watching it in its early stages and sort of playing around. And man, like, honestly, I'm playing around with some of the shit coins and meme coins where it's, it's so stupid, but that's the fun part of it. It's stupid. So, yeah.
So when you say that, do you mean like investing in them and just seeing what happens?
Like investing the bare minimum so that I can feel it. It's almost like if you're watching a sport that you don't care about, it doesn't really matter. But if you put $5 on someone to win, then you're rooting for them to win. There's something at stake.
To pause you there, did you watch the recent UFC?
No.
So Amanda Nunes is this woman who has effectively dominated the women's division. I think I can't remember if it's the welterweight or whatever it was, but I watched her. She got beaten, like just massive, probably the biggest upset that's ever happened in UFC, where this other chick just beat her to a pulp. After she looked like she was Nunez looked like she was smashing this other chick, and then she came into this round and kept standing up with her, and the other chick just kept punching her in the face again and again and again. Got her to the ground, and Amanda didn't even have the choke on, and she tapped, and everyone was just like, what the fuck? Anyway, long story short, I get on and I was like trying to find out, why on earth did she tap? Like, the choke wasn't on. You could have just waited, see what happens. But she was effectively mentally cooked, right? So she just gave up. But someone had put $320,000 on Amanda Nunes to win that, who was effectively a sure thing, and had nothing to show for it. Zero, like completely lost it.
Yeah.
I was just like, that blew my mind,
and that would have been at odds of 1.05 or something, something ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. So he probably would have gotten thousands of dollars, right? Yeah, for such a huge proportion of money, but had never factored in the fact that, you could also lose a huge amount of money.
Yeah. And so, but, that implies that I'm sort of gambling with them, but I wouldn't call it gambling, because it's I'm diving into the communities as well. Yeah, it's education. That's exactly what a gambler would say. But
well, I mean, it's the same as investing in stocks, right? It is gambling at the end of the day, but it's not just blind. I'll pick a random company and put $100,000 into it.
Yeah. You're doing a bit of research and you're picking stuff as well, which you potentially use. A lot of the stuff that and this is stock wise, I'm invested in. It's stuff that I use, so I'm sort of helping it along as well, but through my use of it.
Give me a sort of breakdown of how you would decide on what cryptocurrency to look at, and because again, I'm just totally naive in this area.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to go past Bitcoin just to start off with, just to learn about that, and even just where it sort of came from, and which was sort of in a response to the global financial crisis, in response to banks and the government manipulating the money, money printer go brrr sort of thing, which we've definitely seen during the coronavirus. So an alternative to not having any transparency as to how the money system works at the moment, essentially. So that's a really good one just to start off with and see how like, and it's also the principles behind it. So a lot of it's, related to not your keys, not your crypto. So personal responsibility of your money. It's almost as if you were buying gold bars back in the day. You weren't particularly leaving that to a bank. You are stashing that yourself, and if you lost it, that's on you. That's your fault. So it's becoming a bit more conscious, I guess, of what money is and how you're using it, which I think is, honestly, it's a good thing. Like, I think just chasing money for the sake of chasing money is kind of easy to do nowadays. Whereas when you're more responsible for it, it gives you a bit of a different outlook on it. So honestly,
how do you feel about the connection between Bitcoin and climate change? Because I think that was showing, I don't know what the stats is, but Bitcoin, climate change, let's see what comes up on Google. I think it was something like one study warned that Bitcoin could push global warming beyond 2 degrees Celsius. Another estimated the Bitcoin mining in China alone could generate 130 million metric tons of CO2 by 2024. So that's another thing that's an interesting aspect to it too, right? With the amount of electricity that's used in order to generate Bitcoins, so many people are now, and companies are buying effectively processing units in order to just run them constantly and make Bitcoin in order to earn money. But it's having this deleterious effect on the climate as well. That's potentially going to grow into a huge issue. So that's going to be this weird one too, where you sort of like, we originally just had to cut down trees and turn them into banknotes through a process that obviously did contribute to climate change. But it seems like these cryptocurrencies may be in a position to actually do a lot worse in terms of the energy requirements that are used to generate the income. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, so the two things with that is, one, the current system definitely uses energy as well. So I know a lot of Bitcoin people would say they want to completely, essentially dismantle the current one, and if all of that energy that's being used by Visa, MasterCard, by banks, by like that, the whole production process is just moved onto Bitcoin, maybe it'd even out. The other one is more just, where's that energy coming from? And most of it is from cheap energy sources. In fact, even being wasted energy. So much of the hydroelectric plants and stuff, it's this energy system's designed to handle the biggest load on the worst day of the year. So being able to heat up every single house in Switzerland on the negative whatever degree day and still keep the lights on, and et cetera, and then most of the time it's at a way lesser load, and particularly during the dead of the night when people aren't using electricity as much, particularly et cetera, and so during those times that energy just gets wasted or is turned into other sources. So batteries, for example, you can convert that to batteries, but there's a lot of energy being wasted there. So that's usually when the Bitcoiners come in and we're like, we don't care what time it is. We'll buy that energy when it's cheap and when no one else is using it. So it's sort of...
I wonder what would happen if you could try and make like heaters out of processors to run so that you could be earning money whilst also heating your house.
Yeah. That's an idea. It's to see the whole Bitcoin industry just go to like Russia and these cold ass places.
Yeah, well, that's it. They're contributing to it more in terms of just upping the temperature of all the households around.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of barriers. There's all sorts of complications. There's the aspect that it used to be used for drug money and for like illegal activities.
Was that what was it called again? The something road?
The Silk Road. Yeah.
Silk Road. Was that where it sort of started out?
They were using it a lot on there. But then another one, for example, is Julian Assange. So when WikiLeaks was first really starting to put the pressure on them from, the American government didn't particularly like them, still don't. They started accepting Bitcoin as payment. This was back
because they couldn't have their accounts frozen, right?
Yeah. And that's one where you're like, me personally, I see what WikiLeaks and Julian Assange did as like he was just exposing the truth. He wasn't he wasn't creating terrorists. He wasn't doing things like that. And yeah,
well, that's sort of beside the point, right? I would imagine the governments don't like it because they can't control it. So that'd be a big thing, whether positive or negative for you personally, right? Where it's, even if you believed in Assange, there may be terrorist operative groups that are using Bitcoin in order to fund it. You have zero control over freezing their assets or anything. So yeah, I can see why it's sort of there's a positive and a negative to it.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? The next 10 years will be pretty fascinating seeing how all of this is going. But
and electric cars, man. Have you been following that? Like, I keep seeing more and more Teslas on the road in Australia, and I would totally be up for it if it was cheaper and more affordable and the quality of Tesla was a little bit better. But it's going to be so interesting to think. I don't reckon my son will ever be able to afford and use a petrol or diesel driven car, right? And so it's going to be interesting to see also what his opinions and views of diesel and petrol cars are going to be. Is he going to see them as this kind of like a smoking, right? Where the average person today looks at smokers and is just like, why the fuck would you do that? Yeah. Whereas back in the day, it was just all the rage and everyone smoked because it was, a cultural thing.
Didn't have an option sort of thing not to. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be funny to see if the next generation is just like, you filthy bastards. You were driving around burning fossil fuels. Like, that's disgusting. And you're going to be like, there were no other options. We didn't have electric. Didn't want to ride a horse because it was incredibly efficient and, didn't have electric cars like you do today. Yeah. So it's going to be funny. And it'll be funny to see the dynamics as that shift takes place, where the average, once you go from, I don't know what the percentage is now, but say a few percent of people who own an electric car and it gets past 50, is there going to be this watershed moment where everyone is suddenly shamed, effectively into getting an electric car? Are we going to have demographic splits where poorer people can't afford electric cars, and it's going to sort of lead to them also having to buy petrol that is way too expensive? Like, what's going to happen there in terms of economics? It's going to be really interesting. And then are we going to have to also change our expectations around travel? We can't just say I'm taking a road trip to the Kimberley in my four-wheel drive, because there aren't, you've got an electric four-wheel drive and you can't travel that far on a single. That's an
interesting one, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and what's going to happen with charging? It'll be interesting to see if a completely different dynamic appears for petrol stations, right? When you have to sit there for half an hour, there's no just fill the tank up in 30 seconds and then pay and go. It'll be, you can fill the batteries up, but it takes 30 minutes. So are we going to end up with this really interesting dynamic or culture where you have to time traveling with leisure, say, that like nice cafes or places that you want to actually stop and play with the kids? And that, are we going to see petrol stations now morph into these more social areas and environments where people actually have to spend a significant amount of time waiting for their cars to charge up before moving on to the next place? And you have to do that multiple times. If you want to travel up the East Coast in say from Melbourne to Sydney, you're going to have probably 4 stops along the way. And so it's also going to be the kind of thing that you can't just smash out in 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is. It'll be the kind of thing that takes an entire day. So I don't know. There are all these interesting things, I think, that are going to change with our expectations and our, attitudes towards these kinds of things we took for granted previously, even currently, right? Going on road trips and everything. I can get in my car and drive for 800 kilometers without having to recharge without putting fuel in. And is that just going to become something that's prohibitively expensive, or that is no longer socially okay? People are going to be like, what a waste. You've just put all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You should have just gone to a local place or got a plane, or, yeah.
Yeah. Same with eating meat as well. Will they be able to, I imagine they'd be able to crack not just the sort of soy based ones, but also I've had this
actual meat.
Yeah. Like,
actual meat.
So it's like an actual
lab grown meat
that's been grown into a steak from just like
man,
scraping.
Once you get to that level, there's zero chance we're staying with live animals, right? Because then it becomes you had 2 options, and one of them is cruelty free, and the other one includes slaughtering hundreds of thousands, millions of animals needlessly. So it's going to become that now you're a cunt. Like, if you actively, I need my meat to have suffered.
Exactly.
Needlessly, when it tastes the same. Yeah.
And you wonder, because there still will be people who will say no, that that's not the same thing. It's get
a farm.
I don't trust the process.
Get a farm.
Whatever. And how long would take for them to get phased out? Would it be
they'd probably never be, right?
And
there'll be people who are practicing culturally. I would imagine if you said that to indigenous people who have a certain practice of going out and hunting turtles, say that the average person, like I can't go out and kill an endangered species of turtle, but if I was indigenous, then I would be able to in certain areas, right? Because it's a cultural heritage kind of thing where you're like, for thousands of years, we've been hunting these animals. They have a significance beyond just the meat. So it'll be interesting to see too what happens then with that, and like, how does the public view it? Is it because it's almost now it's kind of fucked up? You think like you see indigenous people hunting dugongs or turtles or even whales, and you're just like, this is fucked. Like it's just. But I eat cows, I eat chickens, I eat all these other animals, and it's like, well, why don't I have the same attitude towards that? So I think it'll just highlight more of that. But yeah, I hope we totally can move towards lab grown meat in the near future. Who knows how far away it is? I think we can do it currently. It's just expensive as fuck, right? Yeah. So a hamburger would be like $100,
Same with diamonds. They can make a diamond by just growing it in a petri dish sort of thing. But
diamonds are inherently not worth anything too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're only worth something because the amount on the market is limited by the Swiss diamond company or whatever it is.
De Beers, yeah.
That's a whole thing too, right?
That's one of my favorite ones, ring. Man.
Because what's the story effectively that engagement, they made a whole advertising campaign in the early 20th century about a girl's best friend and engagement rings weren't even a thing, and then they became one with diamonds, and they chose something that there was a lot of that they could control the distribution of, so that they could artificially keep the prices high. And so diamond rings, it's one of these dumbass investments. If you ever get a diamond, I refused to with my wife. I got her something that she could actually sell for about what it was worth when she got it, right? So we got like a secondhand camera that was worth a few $1,000s. I'm like, you sell this, it's going to be worth about the same. If you get a diamond ring and try and sell it the next day, it's going to be like under 50% of, it's like driving a Ferrari off the lot. Yeah. The moment you buy a Ferrari, it's pretty much just lost $200,000 by you getting in it and driving away.
Yeah.
Those things blow my mind.
I've yet to marry anyone, but they're getting an emerald or a ruby or something there.
Get him a camera, dude. Get him a house. Get him donate some money somewhere. Get him a lab-grown meat burger.
Maybe I can just do a diamond ring NFT or something that's got some scarcity.
Can't you get cremated too? You can get cremated and turned into a diamond. So you could always get Nana when she shuffles off the mortal coil, turn her into a diamond, and be like, "There's Nana."
That's morbid.
I know, Nana will always be with us.
Oh, it's beautiful. What are your thoughts, man, on the future? Are you hopeful? Is it gonna be better than it is now?
I don't know. It's a tough one, right? You think about every single empire that ever existed ended. Like, the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, they all collapsed at one point. So you've got to think this can't last forever.
My question is, that is true. Was there always a better place in the world where it had stuff going on at the time that you could have switched to? So you're correct. Like
you would have to think there's always a pinnacle, right, somewhere. And it probably depends on who you are, what race you are, what language you speak, where you're from, what religion you are. It's going to depend on that, right? I imagine that in Rome, you would have probably loved it if you were a Roman who had citizenship and were, rich and didn't have to go to war. But if you were a, African slave in the Roman Empire, it was probably a pretty shit place.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if nowadays, if there's enough separate countries, enough isolated places at least, or at least not too interconnected, that say if Australia becomes this jailhouse, totalitarian sort of state, maybe I can just switch over to Denmark or Sweden and maybe I won't fit in. I'm not Danish. I don't know how to speak Swedish, but maybe even me being lower on the totem pole there would be better than me being higher on the totem pole in Australia.
Well, it's a tough one. I think Australia is probably one of the best places in the world to live, and obviously we're biased, but so it would be a pretty weird turn of events for Australia to suddenly become, say, China or North Korea.
Yeah.
But yeah, I imagine that if it did, there'd be somewhere better to go. But in terms of like society as a whole, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because we're going to have to deal with climate change. And one of my biggest pet peeves with the human race is that it always seems to it seems to wait until the last moment to actually get its ass into gear, like with COVID, right? You get to see how quickly it can react and how well it can do things. But you'll also see like how there's the malicious side of it, with China covering things up and sort of trying to save face the entire time, so that this thing then does escape and kill 5 million people worldwide. And so human behavior is the annoying part, but also the beautiful part. And I don't know, with climate change, it feels like so many governments are so slow to act because the incentives are set up where they have to effectively protect their constituents' wealth as much as possible. And at the moment, there are still very few incentives for the average politician to prioritize climate change over the wealth of their constituents, right? So making things more expensive, putting a tax on carbon, stopping mining because, or at least reducing it, because that makes up so much of our export, including mostly to China, where a lot of that money then goes to the government and allows us to have our healthcare and our education and the roads and everything. And so it's weird. It's such a difficult problem because it's so sort of slow to be unfolding. It's not like you have the enemies at the gates. They're right fucking there and everyone needs to pick up a sword and fight them. It's kind of like there's a few arriving at a time and they're not a problem, but they're getting more and more and more. And we can prepare right now. It's like, hey, everyone, you can pick up a sword and start training, because it seems like there are more of these warriors showing up at our gates every single day. But people are like, can't be fucked. I want to go to work and keep working on my wealth and, make sure that the family's got enough to eat and everything like that. In the meantime, not realizing that there's going to be a watershed moment where you've got so many that there's not going to be enough time to train. So that's my biggest fear with climate change, is that we will act, but it'll be too late. Even if we can solve it, there will be a huge price to pay for my children, maybe even for me, depending on how quickly it happens and how bad things get. Like I think I was looking up in Queensland, it seems like it's fucked. In Cairns and in Townsville, if you want to get like insurance on some places now for things like cyclone damage and flooding and stuff like that, because of climate change pushing the frequency of these extreme weather events through the roof. I think I saw one woman had to pay something like $120,000 a year to keep her hotel going, just in insurance, because they were like, yeah, cyclones are going to come through almost every single year this time, like from now on into the future, and they're only getting bigger and stronger, that your place is going to effectively be razed to the ground in the next decade or two at least. So we need to charge you a shitload in order to cover that risk. And so you're like, well, what's going to happen when, the entire portion of, say, the coast of eastern coast of Australia that can be flooded, as well as the northern coast of Australia that can receive these huge cyclones and extreme weather events, the average person just gets priced out in terms of insurance. So, housing prices plummet and insurance goes through the roof. So there are all these sort of unforeseen things that could happen and damage the economy and disrupt people and cause people to have to move, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that in the future with climate change. And again, like the reason that Australia seems to have done fuck all is because the Prime Minister is constantly saying we're so small, we're not contributing that much. And it's like, well, as a result of that, every country is effectively too small to real. Then, like, which country is the majority? And China and India are not exactly putting their hand up to be the ones that take this problem onto their shoulders. So
yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. It's one of those things too, where the morbid side of me is like, man, this is an interesting time to be alive. Like give me that joint and a seat up on the hill with a burger and a prostitute, and let's just see what the fuck happens. It's like anytime you watch those Armageddon or like post-apocalyptic films where it's like transitioning, you kind of like, that's horrifying, but that would totally be fucking interesting. Of like, there are zombies now and they're getting worse and worse. And people are having to react to the zombies. And it's like, if I was the old guy in those films, I'd just totally be walking around with this, like Squid Game. Did you watch that?
Yeah. I did.
The old guy in that, and he's just constantly just walking around, just like, and he just doesn't give a fuck, right? Because he's like, if I die, I die, or he knows he can't die because he's dying anyway, and so he's just like, who gives a shit?
Yeah. I've always said I like the interpretation of those things, but I think, in a real genuine zombie pandemic and the real Mount Vesuvius erupts, but it's 100 times larger sort of thing. I just want to get hit by the asteroid like right in the head. I just want it to knock me out. Like I don't think the aftermath would be too much fun.
Yeah, I think it'd wear off pretty quickly, right? You'd see the transition and you'd just be like, this is shit. And I think you would suffer so much from knowing how good it was before.
Yeah.
So I always have that kind of a daydream of like, what is it going to be like to be the humans that were alive when things got worse? Because it seems like for my parents' generation and particularly my grandparents, they've crushed it in terms of when they were born. Jesus Christ, did they win the lottery in terms of wealth and just quality of life, and the fact that they didn't have to work in factories or underground in mines or even go to war. My grandfather skipped that. He got born between the two world wars and then wasn't old enough to go, though he did obviously have to live through it. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to think and to see, are we the generation, you and I, that are going to be seeing the downside of things? Is climate change going to have enough of an effect during the end of our lives to really lead to a decrease in life quality? And if not us, is it going to be our children that really suffer from it? So I can't imagine that. Imagine being like the fall of the Roman Empire. Imagine, I guess it would have been 300 AD, where it had all but kind of just broken apart, and that generation that was still alive, 70, 80, 90 years old, that was like, I could remember when we were fucking badass,
Yeah.
But now we're nothing, right? So it must be such a really weird thing to be like, I remember when this was like this, when things were better, and all is shit. So sorry.
For sure. Hey, have you been reading any books recently? Anything interesting?
No, mostly stuff on stress, rhythm, and pronunciation in English. So I was thinking that you keep dropping all these books, and I'm like, man, I would love to have the time to be able to sit down and read or listen to some of these sorts of books. I love listening to, at the moment, I've been watching a bit of Michael Schermer. Do you know him? So he's the guy from the Skeptic
right?
Society.
Yeah.
So he's kind of, I got hooked on this sort of stuff when I was first started getting into Joe Rogan back in, I don't know, it would have been the 2012, 13, the early teens, and just listening to those sorts of interviews. But I kind of fell off the bandwagon with Joe Rogan in the last few years. He seems to have just swallowed the pill, seems to be off the planet.
Yeah. As soon as he went to Spotify as well, I used to watch him on YouTube, and then I gave up. I don't like Spotify. So yeah.
Exactly. But I started listening to a bunch of other podcasters, and Michael Shermer is one that I really like because he always has really interesting authors on about who are generally just publishing a certain book. And he seems to tackle interesting questions about race relations in the US. And he also doesn't just kind of pander to the audience, or not to the audience, to the guest on. So quite often he challenges the crap out of them. And it's really interesting when that happens. Like there was a guy who came on talking about that weird asteroid that was shaped like a cigar and how that was evidence of aliens sending this out. And, he'd written a book on it, and Michael Shermer was just like, you're a fucking moron. Like a few steps short of that, but effectively dude, you are making so many assumptions upon assumptions upon assumptions with this that it could just be a weird shaped rock, So it was interesting. Just he's a really cool one that I like, and he's kind of still small and authentic. It's not really, his average video on YouTube gets like 5,000-10,000 views. So really recommend him. And then it gives you these interesting books to kind of go and suss out if you really want to. So
cool.
But I would love to have the time at the moment, but a small family and a business makes it hard. So probably need to get back into the gym and have them on audio or something.
For sure. Yeah, my reading schedule's lessened a lot lately. I've been actually thinking of just going a little bit more casual, not casual with the podcast, but especially this past 2 months, man, I've been going balls to the wall, just doing like conversations with editing and stuff, and it's I'm noticing now it's at the point where it's like I'm having so many trade-offs with regards to not being able to put in the time to learn German. I want to like learn to dance, but I'm struggling to like have a consistent night per week where I'm not editing and things like that. So I'm definitely like gonna start.
You need to get hired help, man. You got to hire someone from the Philippines or something to do your editing.
Yeah. The thing is, like, I really like, I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. It's just volume wise, it's too much at the moment. And honestly, I think we could probably step it back a little bit. Like there was a period where we were doing. I personally was putting out eight video / audio things a week across all the separate channels, and it's probably close to like 6 or 7 now, and I could probably put that down to like 4 or 5, and it would still be okay. Just focus on the core stuff. So yeah.
Well, you're gonna make it work for you, right? This is your life. You're gonna make it fit in with your schedule and make sure it's fun and doesn't become a chore.
Yeah, exactly. And it's my sort of thoughts recently have been, if like what am I really good at, and it's more. I get more ideas, more fun things when I'm actually out there doing stuff. So I'll have more fun interactions to talk about on the podcast and make the podcast better if I'm going out and doing these things. Same with like learning German. I love, I'll listen to yours and be like, man, modal phrases or just some random obscure grammar thing. I'm like, that's really cool, man. I want to talk about that. But obviously I won't know about it unless I study for half an hour a day of German and things like that.
Yeah, well, that happened even with me recently, learning about stress in English and how big an impact it has on understanding what people are saying and the intention. That whole thing of like, I gave it to the girl, 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 like, and how that changes the meaning. And so many people learning English just never grab that. They never grasp that aspect of the language, and they lack that nuance. And it's interesting that I heard someone say the other day, "Oh, I've got a sweet tooth." And I was like, it's a sweet tooth.
It's cool.
Like yeah, I've got a sweet tooth. Yeah, I know. It was really funny. And I was just like, oh, fuck. That was the kind of thing that set me off on this journey of trying to learn a lot more about stress and intonation in English, and how you look at something like Chinese, like Mandarin Chinese, and they have, I don't know if you've ever learned it, but they have 4 tones, right?
Yeah, it's all about the tones,
before, right? Like, so it'd be like downwards, upwards, and then it's down and up, and then high, like as in just flat. And they all have phonetic meaning when you put that over a word. And so you can have like jur, 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 and jur. So, and it would change the meaning of it all. We don't really have that on words, but it's within words. We'll have it on syllables like sweet tooth, duh, duh. And we also have it on below that. We'll have it within words. We'll have it with compound words. So you'll have it on something like capability, right? Da, 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 da. So that rhythm, the stress time language, we have stress timed. Da, 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 da. Then you'll have it with compound words like sweet tooth. And then you have it at the sentence level to give you things like questions, statements, surprise. So like you going out later, or you going out later, that sort of, there's so much complexity to English when you really break it down and look at the things like stress and intonation and rhythm that I think a lot of people assume they just never think about. They never try and learn, or at least they do subconsciously. And so I remember so many people are like, well, my native language is so hard. English is so easy. And you just like, mate, anyone who says that about any language is a moron. all languages are hard. All languages are easy. They're just different. And there are different aspects to each language that make them incredibly hard. Like I would look at Mandarin Chinese and be like, this is fucked. The fact that you have to say, 我是, like, oh, 大利亚人, like to say, I am Australian. And I can't even do it quickly because I would mess up what it actually means. And you would suddenly be asking, where's the detergent? Instead of, saying I'm Australian. But it's funny when I look at Mandarin Chinese like that, and I'm like horrified. And people think English is easy because it's so common and they're so used to hearing it and everything, but don't realize that we've actually got tones and intonation and stress, but it's used in a different way. And it's, it still has its own complexities below the sentence level or within the sentence as well, which it just makes it, I don't know, fascinating. Just love learning about languages and how they differ, and how humans, we're all the same species, but we have come up with so many different ways of communicating. We all have, every single different language is different based on all sorts of things, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, intonation, stress, rhythm, all that sort of stuff. And it's just all different ways of solving the same problem that is communication, right?
Yeah. I always wonder how I sound when I speak Spanish, because I know I haven't dived
because it's flat.
Yeah, so one's a native speaker, so he can give me a slight input, but he doesn't know much about languages, so he can't explain exactly what I'm doing. He says sometimes it sounds automatic.
That though, to pause you there, is one really funny thing too, right? That we learn to be so competent at a task. Like I remember doing jiu-jitsu and thinking, Jesus Christ, getting to black belt, that's like 10 years. And the amount of work you have to put in, you don't realize you're a fucking black belt in a language. If you can speak a language, your native language, you are like probably a black belt 10th Dan in terms of your command of that language. But the crazy thing is you know nothing about how it works consciously. Like I remember not even knowing what a phrasal verb was, right? And there's probably a bunch of listeners now who are fluent English speakers, native English speakers, who would be like, what is a phrasal verb, Pete? And it's a verb that has that is a phrase. It's a verb and a prepositional too. So, to go up is a good example, or go down or go out or go in. But yeah, it's amazing that you can be so good at something and have no understanding of how to explain it. Right. And that was the same for me. Even now teaching English, people would ask me, why does sweet tooth sound weird, but sweet tooth doesn't? Or how does it change the meaning? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then you look into it and you're like, fuck, it's so obvious now once you learn about the rules, but you just lack that capability of explaining it, right?
Yeah, I'm starting to get there a little bit with handstands, actually, where I can go up and I can sort of get distracted. Like one thing that's been really weird happening to me recently is I'll go up and I'll be like looking in between my own arms, and I just keep thinking, man, this is what a dog sees when they look down. Like all they see is
when they do that, yeah.
And it's so weird because I'm just going, a couple of years ago I couldn't, I had no capability of anything other than just trying to
concentrate on it.
Yeah, keep up, and now I can do all sorts of fun things up there. The other one that I was going to say is a book that you probably would, and I can't remember if I recommended this last time, it's called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, and it's by Daniel Everett, I believe. And he was a missionary who went to, I believe it was the Amazons, and they had a language which was just something completely new. That's pretty cool.
I think this was the argument that he had with Noam Chomsky over, I forgot what it is, but effectively from memory, the language that he was studying, trying to find the name of it here for you.
I think it starts with a P, maybe?
It was like Papahui or Papatui or something like that. But effectively, I think it lacked a certain grammatical feature that all other languages have, which is being able to join clauses together in a sentence. I think, and again, I'm not a linguist, so I'm probably getting it wrong. But effectively, I think what he found with this language is that they would have to split up sentences like, I am tired, I want to go to bed, instead of I am tired and I want to go to bed. And so Noam Chomsky had the theory that all languages must have that grammatical aspect of joining clauses together into single phrases. And Dan Everett found that he at least believes that this language is the exception. The only trouble is fuck all people speak it because it's from the middle of the Amazon. And they disagree with one another too on the people studying the language who claim to speak it, on how it works. And so it's crazy. I think too, they don't have numbers beyond I think like 3 or 4 or something crazy. So he was sitting there showing them, I'm holding a nail. How many is this? And they would be like 1. And then he'd say, all right, how many is this? 2. And then he would hold up a fistful and they'd be like, many. He'd even hold up 4, where it's an obvious number for us. And they'd be like, many.
Yeah.
So there are these really interesting aspects to to the language, because it's obviously not important. They don't have to count out more than, a handful of things. And then beyond that, they just say there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, I think they had another weird aspect of it was a way of communicating where they were part of like a hive mind, or like they, instead of we talking about just, you and me, it also included our ancestors in it, people who are long dead, people who weren't there, and things like that. So it made talking about things really complex, because you couldn't, and I think this owed to their sort of lack of physical things. They didn't really own stuff as well. So everything was sort of community.
The language is, it's Piraha.
Yeah.
And there's only 350 people who speak it.
Yeah. So if someone's real keen to learn languages, go try that one.
It's nuts. Some of the indigenous ones in Australia are insane too, where like the pronouns will also have relationship status in them. So it would be like us combining phrases of saying, you, Uncle Steve, are doing this today. So you would instantly know from listening to people talk to one another what their relationship was to one another based on the pronouns that they would use. Because obviously when you're in a small group of people, that's incredibly important information to be sharing if you're an indigenous group living off the land, for them at least culturally. And so it was really interesting to think, oh crap, they've got like this system set up where they have pronouns that they use on uncle, auntie, grandmother, child of my wife-in-law's brother or something, like all this crazy stuff that we would just use phrases to explain.
Yeah,
and I think too, some of these indigenous languages don't have colors. They'll have like, yellow, green, brown, and that's it. And it's because the things around them don't have, you're not going to find purple or pink or something else in there, right?
Yeah. They're not picking out like the pastel lilac color for their walls in their house or anything.
Yeah, that's it.
I struggle most with the pronouns and using the right like feminine, masculine, neuter, whatever it is. Like I'll always say things like.
You mean the articles or the genders in German?
I'll mix them both up. So I'll say like las colombianos. So it should be los colombianos, but I'll when I'm just in the flow and not thinking about it, that's probably one that I stuff up a lot. And that's just, I think
that's the kind of thing that's, you just have to grind, and eventually it comes where you'll just know that sounds weird. I still do that in Portuguese all the time.
I know it sounds weird. I usually correct myself immediately afterwards, but I still make the initial mistake. Which is, I
always envy anyone who's learning English, because they only have to learn the and an, right? There's no gendered pronouns or articles or anything like that, or nouns, so you don't have to worry about it, apart from he and she, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when we're learning something like German, there's three. You've got, masculine, feminine, and neuter,
and there's no particular order, like,
and there's no pattern, right?
Much, yeah.
Do you have? I mean, I don't know enough about German, but does it have endings on, like, inflections on the nouns or stuff to be able to tell if they're masculine or feminine, or is it sort of random?
I think there's like some, but it's not as good as Spanish, for example, where everything with ion on the end, or if it's from, like, if it ends with an A, or if it ends with etc., that's feminine. And no, it's so like Spanish, for example, it has if it's from a root word of Greek, so drama, things like that, a couple of others which are like armors or whatnot, then it becomes,
that's right, it's the same in Portuguese, masculine.
Yeah, it becomes masculine. I think German is more like that, where it's everything is that one exceptional thing. There's no broad strokes in it. But yeah, once again, the
good thing, I think, though, is that it doesn't really get in the way of communication. Like if you make those sorts of mistakes. So if you got to that point, and that's also annoying, because people won't necessarily correct you because they know what you mean. Yeah. And so you end up with this like self-fulfilling, like, I don't know, you end up in the positive feedback loop of keeping your mistakes because they're no longer a barrier to communication. So people aren't going, what? Huh? And then you have to improve on what you're saying, or rephrase or something, and then, settle on a different way of phrasing things so that people always understand. The problem with, those sorts of things is they just get ignored. Or, I get ones all the time from my wife, and she's like, oh, I just didn't correct you because it's cute. I'm like, fuck you, dude.
Damn it.
I don't want to be cute. I want to be correct.
Yeah. Fun times, man. Awesome. All right, I think let's leave it there for today, man. We'll
Too easy.
Do more in the future. I enjoy just catching up with you via these ones. So you can become a regular guest. I think the most is 4 or 5. So you still got a fair few to catch up.
I'll work on it. The same for you, man. I think one of your episodes on Aussie English is one of the most popular now.
Oh, really? Yeah, there you go.
I think it was you giving up your job, right? When we talked about that, I think that's in the top 10 at least of like 12,000 downloads. So you've been in a lot of people's ears.
Okay, awesome. Well, glad to hear. It's
good job,
people. That should become my new catchphrase.
No, thanks for having me, Karen.
No, my pleasure, man. And so where do you want people to go to in particular when they're looking up Aussie English and want to know more about languages?
Just go to aussieenglish.com.au or type Aussie English into Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Google. You'll find me. And obviously, if you're learning Australian English or you're interested in migrating to Australia or Australian culture, history, news, go check it out. If you're a native speaker of English, then you might enjoy interview episodes like the one we've sort of done today, but maybe a bit shorter. And the Goss episodes that I do with my dad, where we talk about different news articles that come up that are kind of funny or interesting in one way or another. But go check it out.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks, man.